our closing session. It is my pleasure to introduce our closing speaker, Dr. J.R. Green, Superintendent of Fairfield County School District. Since 2012, under Dr. Green's leadership, Fairfield County School District is in partnership with families and community, strives to prepare students with world-class knowledge, world-class skills, and life and career choices by providing comprehensive, innovative, and rigorous curriculum that fosters lifelong learners in a global society. Under his leadership at Fairfield County School District, he encourages a culture that is driven by the motto, excellence through teamwork. Dr. Green strongly believes he is purposed to work with and to inspire young people. He exhibits that belief through his mentoring initiative, the Griffin Bow Tie Club. Within a few years of joining the district, Dr. Green was responsible for overseeing the construction of the new Fairfield County Career and Technology Center. This center provides career and technical programs of study for students throughout the entire county. The center offers students the opportunity to develop critical skills through a combination of classes and hands-on learning experiences, which allows them to apply academics to real-world problems. Under the leadership of Dr. Green, Fairfield County School District became the first community to enter into a partnership with the University of South Carolina. The Accelerator for Learning and Leadership for South Carolina marshals resources from the entire university in order to address the serious challenges facing South Carolina's highest need school communities, accelerating economic mobility and academic achievement, while also helping young people and their families live better lives. Recognizing the importance of community partnerships, Dr. Green led the effort to establish the Fairfield County School District Foundation. In keeping with community partnerships, Dr. Green was instrumental in reestablishing the Fairfield County Hall of Fame. He impresses upon students that education is the foundation of their future. Dr. Green leaves quite a lasting impression on others and enriches their lives with his noble deeds. His philosophy is simple: do your best. Dr. Green.
Good afternoon. I appreciate that very humbling introduction. Obviously, I have been here for the last 10 years, which is, what we say is a lifetime in the superintendency. I jokingly tell people that you measure superintendent years kind of like dog years. And so 10 years is probably equivalent of about 70 years. And so it has been a true pleasure being in Fairfield County and having an opportunity to work with this wonderful community. First of all, let me thank the organizers for inviting me to participate in this Family and Community Engagement Summit. I had an opportunity to join you this morning to see the welcome from State Superintendent Spearman, and also had a chance to listen to the initial keynote speaker from Francis Marion University, which I have enjoyed as well. Just looking at the comments, the sessions have been absolutely awesome. People have really enjoyed it. I'll try not to disappoint and have you go out on a sour note. So they've given me a little time to really share my thoughts on the value of community and family support. As was mentioned earlier, I am J.R. Green, Superintendent of Schools in Fairfield County. I had a very traditional route to the superintendency. I was a teacher, then I served as an administrator, an assistant principal, a principal, an assistant superintendent, and a superintendent. And so I have spent my professional career in the field of education. And so I have been engaged in this kind of work that you have been discussing over the last quarter century plus. The theme for this year's summit, Moving Beyond Family Night. I had a little time to think about that, exactly what I wanted to say about that theme, but I want to start off by challenging us to really rethink that this whole idea that parental engagement is something that we need to seek. I want us to really challenge ourselves to think about family engagement is something that we really need to seek. And I want to see if we can't move from engagement to support. So let me say that again. I want us to go from from parental or family engagement to parental or family support. Because even though we may have parents and families engaged in what we're trying to do for their children, in many instances, they lack the resources and the skills and the wherewithal to really support young people in a manner in which we realize can best suit their needs. I think we have always, as a system, been committed to student support. We feel as if that's our purpose. Our purpose is to develop young people. And in order to develop them, we must support them. I think it is a shift in thinking to really realize that our mission has to go beyond student support to family support. Because whether we acknowledge it or not, our students cannot maximize their potential if that same kind of support that we are trying to provide them in our facilities through our system does not exist once they leave our walls. And so I want to challenge us a bit today to think about moving from engagement to support. You know, we recognize that some students thrive in each and every system represented here today, while others struggle. I want us to also think about what are the most consistent differences between those that strive and those that struggle within the same system. So is it a system issue? I mean, some are thriving, some are struggling. And I want to ask you this question. I want to get some feedback because this is going to lay the foundation for what we're going to discuss. And I want you to put it in the chat. And I'm going to identify some of the things that are going to be referenced here today. But this is the question. What are the factors that contribute to a student maximizing his or her academic and personal potential? I want you to think about that very globally. I want you to put it in the chat. What are the factors that contribute to a student maximizing his or her academic and personal potential? Thinking about it through the lens of some of these students who are doing great and some of these students that are struggling. What are the factors that determine why some are doing great and some are really, really struggling? Let's see what we get here. I see family support. I see relationships. I see expectations, self-efficacy, parental support, role models, food at home, basic needs being met, resources, exposure. All of those things are on point. I agree with those 100%, and there are many more that I'm quite sure will continue to be shared here today. But my next question is this: do all the students that we serve have access to the things that we just have identified as essential? Do all the students we serve have access to the things that we just identified as essential? And I think the honest answer is they don't. The honest answer is that some people have access to great parental support. Some people have access to unlimited resources. Some people have access to a caring adult. Some people have access to as much food as they want to eat, to a safe environment. Some people have access to those things, while others do not. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, how should we respond as a system, recognizing that everyone does not? So once we recognize that they do not have access to the things that we have just identified as essential, how are we going to respond? And I pose that question in the context of this whole family and engagement summit. I pose that question in the context of, I want us to begin to shift our thinking from family and parental engagement to family and parental support. In many instances, those things that you just referenced are things that need to occur outside of the walls of our schoolhouse. I'm gonna tell you a story. This happened, this is a true story now. This was a few years ago. I was speaking to a parent of a middle school student, Fairfield Middle School. This is a student I've been working with for several years. This was a single mother that had 3 children. And I saw her, I can't remember where I was in the community, but I was asking about the children, how they were doing. And she told me that the oldest son, who was a middle school student, had been suspended from school. And I said, wow, I mean, he was kind of get himself on the right track. And why was he suspended? She said, well, he used some profanity in class and got himself suspended. So I asked her, where was he at the time? She said, he's at home. So a small community like Fairfield, I said, well, I'm going to stop by the house and go see him. So I went to his house, and there he was asleep on the floor. Now, note I said asleep on the floor, he had a mattress on the floor. He didn't have a bed. And I asked him why he had a mattress in basically the living room of the apartment. And he said, well, I had a bed at one point, Superintendent, but there was a bed bug issue, so they had to remove the bed, and we're getting ready to get another bed soon. But right now I'm sleeping on this mattress that's in the living room. And I asked him, I said, well, why did you curse in class? And he told me, he said, well, the kids were teasing me, saying that I smelled. Kids were teasing him about his hygiene. And I said, okay. I said, well, first of all, you shouldn't be cursing in class, but we're gonna do something about that. And the reality was, even as I was in the class, I recognized that, I mean, as I was in his house, I recognized that there was a hygiene issue. And so I said, well, I tell you what we're gonna do. I need to run back to my office, and I'm gonna come back, and I want you to gather all your clothes up. We're gonna wash your clothes today. And he said, well, I was gonna wash them, Superintendent, but my mama, she's still waiting on her check to come in. And she said, as soon as the check come in, that we were gonna wash the clothes. I said, okay. Have you had any lunch yet? He said, no, I'm not had any lunch yet. My mama said she's gonna come back later on today to bring me some lunch. It was, I don't know, maybe 12:30 or so at that point in time. So I left. I went to my office. I came back. I went upstairs to get him. He came back downstairs, and he had one plastic trash bag with him. And I said, no, I told you to bring all your clothes. We're just gonna wash all your clothes today. And he said, these are all my clothes. It was one plastic trash bag. And he and I went to the laundromat. And in that trash bag, he had maybe 2 pairs of socks. He might have had 2 pairs of underwear. I think he had maybe 3 shirts and maybe 2 pairs of pants. And that was all the clothes that he owned. And I recognized that part of the issue was that his clothes just weren't clean consistently because he didn't have a substantial rotation of clothing. Well, we washed his clothes. We went to Pizza Hut. We got a pizza, and then we went to my house. And some people say, well, Superintendent, you're breaking all kinds of rules. Now you're going to people's house, you're taking them to your house. But I did. And one of my daughters was there, and first thing she said, who's this kid you're bringing home? I said, well, don't worry about that. It's one of my students. We're helping him through a few things. And he went to my house. We ate a little pizza. He went in one of my bedrooms. We had some extra clothes that I gave him. He took a shower. He was refreshed. I took him back home, and he was so very thankful. His mother was very thankful. But I recognize that we can do all the things in the world to address reading, writing, and arithmetic. We do all the things in the world to address what we say is his social and emotional health. But until we address his basic fundamental needs, he would never maximize his potential. There would always be barriers that stood in the way of his ultimate success. And I had a conversation with the middle school about what we needed to do to assist this young man in ensuring that his clothes were washed every day. Now, some people will question, rather that is the role of our educational institutions. But I'm gonna get back to this whole philosophy that I just talked about, which is family and community support, not engagement. Yeah, engagement is fine, but that's an example where we needed to provide greater support. You know, there's a model that is being bantered around that we are really discussing in Fairfield County, and I would say that we need to discuss all over this nation, is what we call a whole child education model. I mean, how do we educate the whole child? How do we get outside of this frame that the only thing we need to focus on is rather you can perform on a summative assessment? You know, that's how we tend to measure good schools and bad schools, is who performs good on standardized tests and who doesn't. But a whole child education model recognizes that there are many, many, many facets to a young person outside of how he or she performs on the standardized tests. And I want us to think about, how does this impact our view of the importance of supporting children? See, we have to understand that if a young man is hungry, he's not going to be thinking about geometry. You know, we got to recognize that if you don't have any lights, you're not thinking about Macbeth. We got to recognize that if you don't feel safe in home and in your communities, if you don't feel as if you're loved, if you don't feel as if your entire needs are being met, there's no way you can maximize your academic and personal potential. And so I want to go back to parental and family and community support, because the only way we can really change that dynamic is we have to shift our paradigm and recognize that it is our responsibility, if ultimately we want them to maximize their potential, to figure out how we engage the family and community to create the kind of support that will be necessary for our young people to maximize their potential. You know, the tenets of a whole child education model says that each student needs to be healthy. Now, there are some things that we can do within the walls of a school to address the healthy aspect of a young person, but we can't do it exclusively in schools. Each young person needs to feel safe. There's some things we can do within the walls of a school, but there are things that need to happen outside the walls of a school for a young person to feel safe. Each student needs to be actively engaged in learning and connected to not only his school, but his or her community. Each student needs to feel supported by a qualified and caring adult. So as much as we want them to be cared for in the school, we need for them to be cared for outside as well. And finally, each student needs to be challenged academically and prepared for success. Now, I don't think anyone would disagree with the tenets that I have just laid out. But the question is, who is responsible for that? And I think that is ultimately the challenge that faces us today. Is there is some question about who is ultimately responsible for that. I mean, who is responsible when we talk about ensuring that all these needs are met, that he's healthy, that he's safe, that all of these things occur? I think sometimes we as a system say, well, we have a part to play, but it's not our responsibility to ensure all those things are met. And there are some people in the community that say, hey, that's the school's job. It's your job to make sure all of these things are met. And some community members and some parents say the same thing. But I'm here to let you know that it is all of our responsibility to ensure all of those things are met. It is each and every person, teachers and principals and parent liaisons, mamas and daddies and uncles and aunts and deacons and neighbors and business people. It's every single person's responsibility You know, that's why we have the motto in Fairfield County of excellence through teamwork, because we recognize that there is no way we can maximize the academic and personal potential of every young person without the efforts of every single stakeholder in our community. So it is all of our responsibility to ensure that it happens. Now, that's difficult because sometimes as school people, we try to go it alone. You know, we try and say, well, we can fix it all. And folks, while we do have a part, I challenge us to challenge our community to be a part of that solution. I challenge us to challenge our families to be a part of that solution with the recognition that we are going to help you where you fall short. You know, there was a book written in 2010 by Jamie Vollmer called Schools Can't Do It Alone. Because we can't, folks. As hard as we try, we cannot do it alone. We have to engage partners, not just parents. We have to engage the entire community. That's why I say partners. And that gets back to my other concept, which is what I'm going to refer to as community schooling. And see, community schooling recognizes that students often come to us with challenges that impact their ability to learn, explore, and develop to their greatest potential. Because learning never happens, folks, in isolation. We must address multiple needs, from nutrition, to food insecurity, healthcare, mental health, housing, crime, and much more. You know, historically, we have attempted to compartmentalize those problems and act as if they are not interconnected, but they absolutely are. And we must figure out how we engage not only parents, we must figure out how we support not only parents, but how we engage our broader community around making all of those things a reality for the young people that we serve. So that's the conversation that we're beginning to have in Fairfield County that I encourage all of us to have with our respective community. What part will you play in ensuring that all of our young people can maximize their potential? So whenever a community member asks me, JR, tell me what you're going to do to fix school. Tell me what you're going to do to make sure all kids are successful. Tell me what you're going to do to make sure all young people reach their potential. My response is always, tell me what we're going to do. Tell me what we are going to do, because you are part of this community just as I may play a different role, but you have a role to play as well, whether you have children in the system or rather you don't. And so this whole community schooling model reinforces our understanding that it is everybody's responsibility to help develop the young people in our community. So I want us to resist this idea that it is totally up to us. It is totally our responsibility to ensure that young people reach their full potential. And schools obviously have a lot to do with that, but it's not totally our charge to carry. You know, I'll tell you another story. We have a children's home in Fairfield County. It's called Cambio Academy. They serve students that are in DSS custody. And I often meet with young people as they are enrolled in our system. And a couple of years ago, a young lady was coming in our system. And she was, I think she was in 10th grade. And I was going over her transcript, and she had done a tremendous job her 9th grade year. Did great, okay, A's and B's. Her 10th grade year was an absolute disaster. I mean, I think she might have failed every course. And I was talking to her and I said, you know, you did good your 9th grade year, but your 10th grade year, It didn't go well at all. So, I mean, tell me what happened. And her response really made me feel foolish because she said, Superintendent, I mean, you talking about how I did in algebra. You know, what I'm talking to you about is where am I going to sleep? I mean, I wouldn't focus on science. I mean, my focus was what am I going to eat? I mean, I wasn't thinking about math. I mean, I was focused on whether I was going to have lights. And I said, wow, that makes a lot of sense. That if we are not collectively addressing those needs, then your focus will never be on school. And someone told me one time, they said, well, you suggesting that children from poverty can't be successful. I just disagree with that. And I would never tell you that. Children from poverty can thrive like anyone else, but we have to recognize the barrier that exists before them. Those barriers are real. You know, I was having a conversation with a gentleman one time, and he told me, he said, well, I read a story about a homeless guy who went to Harvard. So that may disprove your theory, JR. And I said, well, let me ask you this question. How many homeless people do you know that went to Harvard? Or better still, I want you to go to Harvard, and I want you to tell me how many of the people that you encountered were homeless. Or how many do you encounter that came from homes like yours and came from homes like mine? And though we can't ensure that everyone comes from a home like yours, a home like mine, it must be our responsibility as a community to do all we can to fill in the gaps where we recognize that they exist. You know, I spoke to the director of that facility, and she said, you know, I'd always wondered why so many of the students in my facility had so many academic struggles. And why was that common to all the students? And I told her, regardless of where your students come from, and they came from all over, Charleston, Myrtle Beach, Lancaster, Lexington, Seneca, I mean, they came from all over, but they had one thing in common. They all had experienced significant trauma in their lives. As we know, by the time DSS says we're removing you from your family and putting you in the custody of DSS, it is likely a pretty significant situation. So the pillars of community schooling really say that we have to integrate these supports and address not only the in-school situations, but the out-of-school barriers to learning through partnerships, through various agencies with social and health services and agencies to really address the needs of our young people. We have to expand learning time and opportunities to include after-school tutoring on the weekend and summers. We have to really expand upon family and community engagement opportunities that bring parents and others together as partners around this idea of collective responsibility. And finally, which is probably most important, is we need collaborative leadership and practice that builds a culture of professional learning and collective trust. That culture is so very important. You know, I challenge you to rethink this whole child education and community schooling model and how it impacts the manner in which we engage with the parents and our greater community. I'm gonna close by kind of sharing a story that I engaged with a friend of mine, Russell Booker. If anybody here is from Spartanburg, Russell Booker is the previous superintendent in Spartanburg. And he was there, I think, maybe 12 years. He retired, and now he's leading an organization called the Spartanburg Academic Movement, which really embraces this whole concept of community schooling and whole child education. And in conversation, Russell said, JR, you know, we were doing a lot of things to move the needle, but we recognize if if we didn't address some of the things that happen outside of schools, we would always find ourselves coming up short. And so some of the same things that you and I are discussing during this summit, he and I talked about, like food insecurity and inadequate housing and feeling safe and ensuring that parents had financial stability and all of those things. And what the community felt their role was in that entire process, because in many instances, they felt that it was the school job to make sure that it was done, and they were there, ready, willing, and able to support the school. But Russell said, JR, we made a shift. We made a shift. And as we looked at a diagram before, the way the diagram was positioned was that we had schools in the center of the diagram. And around schools were parents and healthcare agencies and DSS and community organizations, and all of these partners were right around schools to support schools. And we thought that was a good thing, but we had to shift our thinking. And we put students in the center of that diagram. So now students in the center of that diagram, and schools and system are one of many other partners around the circle to support students. So now it's not only schools' responsibility, but it's healthcare agencies and philanthropic organizations and community groups and parents and grandparents and churches. Now it's everybody's responsibility. That really illustrates this whole concept of whole child education and community schooling. Folks, I think I'm about 1 minute away from my time, and I don't want to go over. But I appreciate the opportunity to address you here today. Hopefully, I've given you a few things that you would even consider, because I think there is tremendous upside if we embrace the opportunity to redefine our whole thinking around engagement and move to support, and really rethinking our position that we can go it alone, because we can't. We need these partners to be a part of the solution. I appreciate the opportunity to address you here today. Hopefully you did not end on a sour note. Have a wonderful day. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Green. The comments alone are telling you that what you shared with us, their words, the charge that you made to us to move from engagement to family support just really resonates with all of us. Participants